This week, Tiff and I are so thrilled to welcome Ravi Rajani to the Revenue Insiders. Ravi is the author of the newly released book, Relationship Currency. Today, we're diving deep into what it really means to build trusted relationships, unearth authentic human connection, and grow your influence. All, of course, with integrity. If you care about leading with empathy and driving impact through your relationships, this one's for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
I found you on LinkedIn
Mm.
because Tiffany and I were talking and we were planning episodes, and Tiffany said, let's do an episode on relationship currency. I was like, that's not a term I'm familiar with. And I can't remember why it came up or where you heard it, Tiffany, but you were like, I want to talk about our own currencies and what we use internally to be successful at work. And I think 2 hours later, I was on LinkedIn and your post about your book came out. And I was like, this is meant to be. I must reach out. And I don't do that very often. So meant to be, glad to have you here.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I think I just thought of a term to use to describe what I wanted to talk about in our episode, Cal. So I don't even know if I heard it somewhere. So yes, very kismic. I'm so excited, Ravi, to have you on. This is going to be a great conversation.
Serendipitous, my friend. Serendipitous. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And, the term relationship currency, the more I think about it and the more I think about it, it is the only currency that has ever mattered in business and life. No matter what technological changes come our way, I still believe it's the most important currency out there. So I'm glad you both subscribe to it.
It was a great read. For those of our listeners who haven't met you, could you give us a quick introduction who you are?
Do you want the jargon-filled technical corporate response?
No,
we don't.
I didn't think that was your energy. So where do I begin? Well, let me blame it on my mum. I have to blame it on my mum because when I was about 8 or 9 years old, she shoved me, literally, into the same dance school as my little sister. And it was funny, Tiffany and Kelly, on the outside, I was mad. I was so mad because I was the only guy in dance in school in a dance class, and I was so scared that this dirty little secret was gonna get out, and it did, by the way. But that's a story for another day. But on the inside, I was like, "Oh wow, this is cool. I've never felt this way before. I'm falling in love with the stage," and I didn't know, but my mum had Miyagi'd me. Karate Kid fans, if you know, she was secretly teaching me the art of stage presence and public speaking and storytelling. So eventually she let me quit, thankfully. And I stumbled into theater as a teen. I had no idea, but my best friend's dad was a playwright by night. So one play led to another, which led to meteor roles, which eventually led me to performing at the National Youth Theatre in London. So growing up, all my friends would always be like, "Hey, Rev, are you going to take this whole presenting, speaking, or acting thing seriously? Because we think you're pretty good at it." And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I had two voices on my shoulder. One voice was like, "Do it. It's going to be so fun. It's going to be epic. You're going to love it. It's going to be so fulfilling." And the other voice was like, "Listen, greed is good. Gordon Gekko was my guy back then. Once I had watched the movie Wall Street, and it said, go into investment banking, go make some money." So I listened to that voice on my shoulder, and that's what I did. I ended up on the trading floor at Citibank, where I actually began my career in corporate sales. And year after year went by, and I started to get this niggling sensation internally that, why does something feel off? I've got everything I desired on paper, yet something feels off internally. I had this void, and I said, you know what? Instead of filling it with activities and things which stroke my ego, I want to go on a journey to figure out, what does Ravi want in this next season of his life? So that's what I did. The next 4 years when I quit was in August 2016. So yeah, the next 4 years was what I call the great experiment. So I was testing TV, Kelly, radio, Tiffany, consulting, coaching, and sales leadership in early stage tech startups. And then in September 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, the perfect time to go all in on you, I said, let's do this. And hey, I haven't looked back since.
Yeah. I mean, your journey in itself is fascinating. And I think what you just did reminds me of like a concept in the book too, this concept of like the storytelling questions or the social proof story, which I found fascinating in the book. Storytelling is something, Kelly and I think both from enablement perspective spend a lot of time talking about storytelling in the context of like sales coaching. But just in like the everyday interactions and how you use it to influence is really interesting. Did you get a lot of those storytelling skills from that background that you just described, or is it something that you honed in those like the 2016 to 2020 years, or where did you start to develop that concept and that skill?
Hmm. I would say, Tiffany, that it's been decades in the making. But I've been learning a lot of the time without knowing it. So going back to this concept of being Miyagi'd, my mum Miyagi'd me by pushing me and shoving me into dance school. My best friend's dad Miyagi'd me by subtly teaching me the art of storytelling from stage. And then every trusted guide and mentor in between, whether it was delivering pitches in investment banking
Mm.
or trying to get our startup to be seen, I was learning these skills and I was unconsciously increasing my competence with the skill set. So I would say it's been decades in the making, which actually a lot of your listeners will go, that sucks. I wish it was this course that I could go to and I'd come out and I'd just be this great communicator or storyteller. Here's the thing. I have a belief that everybody has a genius. Everybody has a gift. And we've unknowingly been harnessing that gift for decades without even knowing it. And it becomes now intuitive to us. It's unconscious. It's instinctive. And I'm actually curious to know, if I had to ask you both a question, what would you say your genius is? The thing that you just do naturally that other people find difficult?
That is a great question. I think that mine falls somewhere in not deep listening. I don't know that I'm as good at that. That was another concept in your book, but
Yeah.
I'm an empathetic leader. And I think that that skill is hard for people to wrap like, they don't have a good name for it, but I think that is part of my genius that has gotten me really far in my career that comes very naturally to me.
Wow. What about
It,
you, Kelly?
I knew you were going to say that, Tiffany. And I was also going to say, I think we might actually have a very similar one. And I can't put mine into words either, but people tend to open up to me.
Mm.
So I think part of my success in the corporate world is that people feel comfortable sharing what they're thinking, what's happening, that they've got some fears or they need coaching differently than they would with other leaders. And so that's been mine. Again, I can't put it into words, but it's something there. And
Yeah.
again,
I bet.
completely
I bet.
unconscious of how I do that. I could never teach someone else to do that,
Mm.
but it's something that I
Well,
think Tiffany and I both have a skill at.
we do. Probably why we're running a podcast, maybe.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I was actually curious to know. Sorry, I hope you don't mind me just asking
No,
you
No,
both
please
questions for a
interrupt us,
sec.
please.
let's
I'm
do it. Yeah.
I'm curious to know. Was there a moment that you realized you had this superpower? Like, when was that first moment you were like, "Hold on, this is my edge"?
Hmm.
Probably when it became a burden. And I know that sounds bad, but there are points in time as a leader where it was actually, I think it was probably during COVID,
Mm.
where you were so empathetic that you were carrying the weight of your entire team and you also are burning out. And I think it was a moment of no one else feels like they're carrying the weight of their entire team. They're just carrying the weight of themselves. And I was like, I feel way more, I think. And I feel like I'm carrying more than the average leader is. And it was the moment that it clicked for me. And so that's maybe a negative connection to it, but it was when it actually became a little bit of a risk.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't think mine's as negative of a
Great.
connection.
I'm glad. I'm glad.
I I remember I was on my prior role at DocuSign. My entire peer set was a whole set of male VPs that I worked with, and we were in a room doing some sort of like communications, one of those tests. I don't even remember which one it was, but
Mm.
my emotional intelligence came back really high and everyone else's scored low across the board. And they were giving me a hard time that like it's not like a leadership trait. And I was like, wait a second, like this is what makes me like, this is why I'm good at my job. Like, what do you mean it's not a leadership trait? And we ended up they were great. I'm still friends with them today. We have a text thread of all the things that we need to debate on a regular basis in the RevOps space. But we started having this big conversation around like why that was so critical and how that made me a leader and why they actually like respected me as a leader and why we were close friends and worked together. I think that was my aha moment that was actually like part of my secret sauce or my genius, as you called it, Ravi,
Mm.
was in that moment, probably in the middle of COVID too, at the same time. So maybe using it more or started practicing it more subconsciously.
Isn't it interesting? Because the very thing that is often we see as an imperfection is, once again, often the very thing that makes us influential. And that's actually a quote from the book from a dude called Josh Shipp, which is the idea that your imperfections make you influential. And I'm paraphrasing it, but it's so cool that the both of you have that idea of empathetic leadership and EQ. So that makes sense. You run a podcast, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
One of the topics you bring up in the book that hit home for me that I think is such a good reminder for everyone,
Mm.
and it was be fixed on the desire, but flexible on the
I
path.
wrote that down.
I love,
Okay, I love that. Okay.
and it hit home for me because in the past year, made a drastic change from corporate America. Never expected to go into consulting or starting a podcast at this point in my career. That was my, when I'm in my 50s or 60s goal. That was not when I turned 40 goal. And so I loved that because I've also been trying to coach other people on this. And the corporate ladder still, even in today's world, becomes this path that a lot of individuals think they have to follow.
Mm.
I thought that was I just loved the way you put that into words. It was great.
Thank you so much. I really received that. And I would say that's something that's been true in my life. There's been seasons where I've pursued certain external goals, and often from a place of ego, and often from a place of seeking validation or whatever it might be. And then once that goal has been received and achieved, I'm like, oh, is that it? Or rather, I hold on to that goal so tight and I'm not willing to pivot. So the idea over the years that I've become very comfortable with is, as you said, stay fixed on the desire, but the flexible through the path in which you receive that desire. And I think when you remain open to the infinite possibilities that something may come to you or the pivot, it helps you loosen that death grip on the desire, and it actually prevents reactive behavior. And for those listening, the definition of reactive behavior that I love the most is from the spiritual wisdom of Kabbalah, which, once again, paraphrasing, is any behavior that is grounded in lack, scarcity, or fear. So, we've all been there, the leader who hoards onto information because they secretly don't want their number two to surpass them. You're both laughing, so you've seen it, right?
You've seen it.
You've seen it. And then you've got the salesperson, right, who has to close this one deal today because they need to meet or surpass their quota. So they engage in inauthentic behavior in this engineered scenario and they lose trust. So we see it all the time. And I really think when we loosen the death grip and we prevent reactive behavior, we're suffocating instant gratification, which I see as the villain in our story today.
I think so when I was reading your book, one of the things that I tied together as we're talking about this and this concept of like the being fixed on the goal but flexible on the path was aligning it to the concept of deep listening versus active listening. I think when
Mm.
you allow yourself to be flexible on the path, or this was the takeaway I had at least, you open yourself up to that concept you introduced of deep listening because you're not so fixed on the answer, right? If we were in just active listening here, I would be fixed on just the the answer that you're giving next so I can ask my next question, because I've already laid out the journey of how this whole conversation needs to go, instead of us actively having a conversation and truly listening to each other. And to me, those two things really clicked together well, of a concept of just like, what do we want to get out of something like a conversation like this, and how do we just make sure that it evolves over the course of the 30 minutes or so we get to chat.
Isn't it funny though, when this is my truth, it doesn't have to be yours, but I'm curious to know your take. When we come prepared, it creates this sense of safety that we know we are in integrity with ourselves and our values because we've come prepared. But then if we try and ask that question because we love it, or because it's tied so much of our research into it, but then we don't let the conversation flow, we actually do ourselves and everybody a disservice. Isn't it funny that actually just learning how
Yeah.
to become comfortable in one's own skin is really a skill, and being able to do that powerfully?
I think that that's the secret to public speaking. Like, so many
Mm,
people are terrified of public speaking, and it's because they come so prepared. In
mm.
all the public speaking I've done, that's what makes it easier, is I'm not over prepared. That sounds terrible to say out loud.
I know. I was like, oh, Tiffany, don't tell people this about us.
You can edit this. You can edit this out.
We're in the
But I
hotel
love the
lobby
truth.
being like, I think I have a panel today. What are the 4 questions again?
Yeah. But it's true. It makes you so much more authentic in the moment when you haven't scripted yourself, and it allows you to truly listen to the question and respond. There's a difference between being prepared and being rehearsed.
Mm.
We come prepared. We put briefs together for our episodes. We chat with our guests ahead of time. We did not rehearse the questions and answers. So I think it's maybe that rehearsal is taking it a step too far sometimes.
And it's interesting. I was talking about this during the Q&A of a speech I gave a couple of months ago in the summer. And I said, amateurs wing it, but professionals make you feel like they're winging it because of the high level of unconscious competence with that speech or
Mhm.
talk or whatever it could be. And what I found personally, and I'd love to hear if this resonates with you, but the more I practice a speech or whatever it could be, a presentation, the more I give myself the conscious capacity to pivot and remain nimble. Because if I don't know about my topic in question, that's all I'm going to be thinking about. So when people think, oh, I don't like scripts, I don't like frameworks, here's how I see it. I see it as find a framework, follow that framework, create freedom in that framework, and then break it and create your own. But it first begins with finding that script or framework and actually following it.
I do a lot of sales training in my
Mm,
career. And
yeah.
there's a couple things that we do call planning. But something that resonated with your book is I'm always like, you have to be genuinely curious. You cannot
Mm,
stick to your script. But what I hear from you that I love so much is it's okay to prepare, but you just have to be flexible in that. And
mm,
the thing that I also loved in the book is you talked about don't seek the outcome.
mm,
And I think that's what so many sellers do. They already have in their head what the outcome needs to be of this call. I
mm,
need you to say that you want this product
mm.
and that you want to move to the next step. And when you're focused on those outcomes, you're not listening anymore. And so, from a sales perspective, I just thought that was so enlightening and will definitely change the way I teach call planning moving forward to be less scripted. So, thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And there's a lot coming up for me as you were talking, and it actually stems to what Tiffany said earlier about listening. And just to take it back slightly and then add on and build upon what you just said, it was Carl Rogers and Richard Farson who introduced the idea of active listening rather back in 1957. And really, the idea was that we get inside the speaker's mind, we grasp their point of view, and then we convey using the spoken word that we get their point of view. That's cool. And that's great. But I don't know if you've ever felt this. Sometimes we can take that to the extreme. So maybe you've heard a seller on a call who's become suddenly infatuated with the idea of active listening. And then they suddenly sound like a parrot because they're just repeating back the words. And then all of a sudden that's broken trust because it sounds like a gimmick. It sounds like a hack of some form. And you're both nodding, so you've been there. So the idea and this is something I talk about in the book, is once we have active listening as a starting point, what we can graduate towards is deep listening, which really is active listening on steroids. And the idea here is that you go beyond the spoken word and that you also have to go inward to pick up on what's not being said and also listen to your intuition to pick up on the energetic signals that you're receiving. So let's take an actual example of what that looks like in practice so listeners can actually feel what I'm talking about here. So let's say I'm in a one-on-one call with a team member and they say, they're talking about their story with burnout, which is something that is really important to them or something that is really troubling them in this season of their life. Active listening would be like, I hear you, Ravi. It sounds like burnout is the problem and you're worried about not hitting your personal and professional goals. Cool. It sounds similar to what I was saying, but it's missing that level of empathy that you spoke about, Tiffany. Now, empathy, as I define it, is being interested in what somebody is emotionally invested in. So how do we convey that? Well, deep listening would go a little something like, Rav, I can feel the exhaustion from your energy. And I get the sense that everything feels really heavy for you right now. And it seems like your mind is telling you to push through, but your body is saying, stop, slow down, Rav. But given you've struggled with pressing pause in the past, I can imagine that this is a really big decision for you to make. What do you feel intuitively makes the most sense for you as a next step? I mean, how did the two of you feel that was in relation to active listening?
Yeah. I mean, you nail the empathetic side of it, right? That's the it's not just feeling heard, it's feeling understood, I think is the
Mm,
difference.
Ooh,
Active
I like
listening
that.
is feeling heard, but versus like the second example, you start to feel understood. Someone gets you. And I think that's so important. People just want to be understood. That's why empathy matters in
yeah,
leadership.
I'm with you. I think actually, not even I think, I believe we are so caught up in machines and systems and how to automate things at scale that we're actually forgetting the art of making somebody feel seen, heard, and understood, like you mentioned, really lies in doing the unscalable, creating intimacy and focusing on human connection. And as you both know, as podcast hosts, one of the most potent ways you can actually do that and achieve that end outcome is through asking conscious questions.
One thing this brings up for me that I thought about a lot in the book was we as leaders often hear, I'm a coach as well, that I'm being told I'm not strategic enough. How do I become more strategic? This is something you hear from those trying to grow in their career. How do I become more strategic? What do I need to do? And I hate when leaders say that. I've definitely said it to people though too, so I'm guilty. But sometimes I think actually the reason someone's being perceived as not strategic is because they're not building the relationships in the way you talk about in the book.
Mm.
It's not that they don't have the competence to be strategic, but they are missing the relationship piece of being strategic. And it's definitely a tool that I now have in my tool belt for when I'm coaching individuals where I think that is the missing key.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for some reason in coaching, I forget that some of it is just how you interact with others in your relationship. And it makes so much of a difference in how you're perceived. And sometimes you're not strategic.
It reminds me of the example you gave, Ravi, in the book around, I forget which role it was at in banking. And there was someone on the floor that like he treated everyone the same way and he looked people in the eyes and, like always was super interested in people. And I do think those types of skills like are important for being seen as strategic because what they do is when you behave that way, I mean, it matters who that you do it to everyone, but when you behave that way upward from a leadership perspective, leaders start to see you as peers because you're treating them as peers and interested in them instead of like scared of them or trying to like over rehearse and not actually listening to them. So I do think, Kelly, I hadn't put those together, but it does remind me of that example. And I think that there's something to that. Curious, Robbie, what
Yes.
you think.
As you both were talking, I became curious about how you would define strategic. So how do you define strategic? Because I feel as though everybody has their own definition of it. You know, I was talking to a friend the other day and I was like, I think when we both look at something, you see black and I see blue. And then we both go home and we're like, cool, that thing's black. And I'm like, great, that thing's blue. And we think we're on the same page, but our definition of black and blue is completely different. So I'm actually curious to know, strategic, how would you define it?
So I'm going to turn this on its head a little bit, I think the word strategic is such a cop out. And I think we all use it as an excuse. Think of times, like I can think of so many coaching clients that I have, and even conversations, I've done this before, where you didn't promote them and you can't put into words why they didn't get promoted. So you use the cop out. You're not strategic enough yet. You're not getting exactly what you want out of an individual on your team, but again, can't put it into words. So you need to be a little bit more strategic. I think us as leaders, and it's across the board, use the word strategic as a giant cop out because we cannot best coach the individual on what we are expecting from them.
Wow, shots fired. I love it. Shots fired. Tiffany, what about you? What do you think? You're shaking your head.
I don't disagree, but I don't fully, there is like strategic has a definition. I do think we overuse it to simplify things and get like paint a broad brush of what we're trying to say or to sound like very important or cool. This is a very strategic conversation. So I do think that there is an element of that that's happening. I think that truly being strategic, though, is being able to take a step back and look at things from a larger lens, either further into the future, a bigger picture outside of whatever your remit is, whether it's the remit of just the conversation you're having or what you own from a business perspective or personal perspective, and think about something bigger than how you are currently looking at it and expand that lens into a bigger area. And that is very hard to coach or explain because often as leaders, you aren't enabling people to have the space to do that. And I do think it's how it gets back to some of that deep listening, though, because that's how you expand your knowledge or your space, is by making room for a real conversation to understand things outside of the bounds of what you thought the outcome needed to be. And so there's some tie in there. But I do think that there's a bigger picture element to strategic or to strategy as a definition.
You know, what's coming up for me as you were both talking about that was I hear and recognize how, from your lens and point of view, that both of those definitions can hold true. And when it comes to being strategic in a conversation, here's something for the listeners that they could think about. When we think about asking conscious questions, and this is habit 2 inside of the book, how I define a conscious question is a question that's grounded in positive intentionality. And there's 3 different types of questions that I actually teach. More specifically, 3 different types of conscious questions that I teach. And one of them being a story-worthy question, which is the idea that it's a question that does 2 things. It extracts a story from your conversation partner, or it stops somebody in their tracks and stimulates thought. That really is the North Star because it tells somebody a positive story about you. So let's say somebody's on a call with a prospect and they say, hey, would you like to switch suppliers? Yes. No. That's not a bad question, but it requires context. You know, is it 1 minute into the conversation? Is it 20 minutes into the conversation? Is it the third call? Whatever it could be. But let's say it's at the start of the first conversation. That's a bit much. That conversation could end up in an abrupt end. The flip of that is turning it into a story-worthy question, otherwise known as an open-ended question, where you could say, hey, Tiffany, could you tell me about the moment when you first sensed trouble with your supplier? Yeah, it was that time when they hit us with this 25% price increase without even telling us. And I remember it just broke trust instantly. We started thinking, are they really the partners for us? And then it could be, tell me more. And now it's authentic, but it's also strategic, right? And I think the objection that some may have is, well, if you're being strategic, you're being inauthentic, right? Because now you're using these types of questions that are rehearsed. But hey, at one point, brushing your teeth felt inauthentic. It does for my 3-year-old. I tell you that. It does for my 3-year-old. And for me, brushing my teeth is now an unconscious habit. Why? Because I've done it enough times that it now is done on autopilot. So I would say you just haven't done it enough yet.
So I have a funny confession to make. So obviously, all three of us are parents. You just mentioned you have a 3-year-old. Kelly and
Yeah.
I have 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and our
Okay.
6-year-olds are currently dealing with some friendship challenges. There's a text thread
No.
off on the side.
Whew.
There's a
We just
trio
got
of
some
them.
text why we've been on this podcast.
Yeah, there's a trio of them and they're struggling. And so I read your book over the weekend and I picked up my daughter yesterday from school and the three of them were in the midst of they were in a battle. Like Kelly's daughter walked up to me waving her finger, "You call my mom and tell her so and so is being mean to me." And I said, "I will not do that. Go work out your problem." So I'm in the car with my daughter and I was like, I'm going to ask her I'm going to ask her an open-ended question and see how this works. She started talking so much. I got all the details. I got who their crushes were. I got why they're mad at each other. I got everything out of that conversation that I hadn't gotten yet. And so, confession slash hot tip for the parents listening, it works on your children too. So,
That is music to my ears. That is brilliant. And hey, listen, I've got a 3-year-old daughter and a 10-month-old son. And I always get told, Ravi, your problems that you have right now, I wish I could have those. And I'm like, really? They're like, yeah, little kids, little problems. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now you're telling me about that. I mean, that's a different ballgame.
yeah. Yeah, it is. It's real
Different
fun to
ballgame.
navigate.
It's real fun. They're also a little bit more like sisters than they are friends, which creates a different type of toughness in their conversations.
Yeah.
Which is
Look at
good. Do you think that's good though when you say toughness?
Do you think they're going to learn skills that most kids don't learn until they're probably in middle school or high school
Wow.
because they're having to navigate challenges earlier, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
The quote I got yesterday was Kelly's daughter is her own person and she's making her own decisions. It's like, well,
Yep.
that is true. I
That
was
is
trying to
true.
say, like, could you what would need to happen for the three of you to be getting along during after school care? Like, what would that look like if all three of you were getting along? And that's what I was trying to get out of her was to her to like think about like what that would be so we could get to like steps we could take. And she's like, she's her own person and she makes her own decisions. And I was like, okay.
That sounds like a boardroom. I mean, you could
Yeah.
probably hear those similar
Yeah.
conversations
Yeah.
between marketing and sales, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be a force
Yeah.
when they're older. It's going to be terrifying for all of us. Okay, we're almost at time, but there's like one topic I really want to hit on.
Yes, let's do
And
it.
that
Let's do it.
is, I think so many people need this little blurb of genius, which is how do you accept a compliment? I loved this part of the book because I feel like so many people struggle with this. And I'm just curious, how do you recommend people accept a compliment?
Wow. Well, I did not expect you to say that. That's the first time I've actually been asked that question on a podcast with regards to this book. So I appreciate that. Well, let's flip it for a second because then it'll make more sense, I feel, to the listener. And by the way, are you good for time? I am, by the way, but yeah, okay. So flipping it would mean let's talk about how to give an authentic compliment. So researchers have actually found that when one receives a genuine compliment, it actually activates the same part of our brain that lights up when we receive a financial reward, which is just crazy. It's incredible that a compliment can feel like a cash injection, right? Blows my mind. Now, what's interesting about this, there's a lot of people in your team, and I'm talking to the listeners right now, that would actually maybe prefer being seen and acknowledged in public in front of their peers than a little random spiff, right? That hits their bank account in silence. The question is, how do you do that in a way that's meaningful? So I want to introduce you to the ASI framework. And A stands for authenticity, S stands for specificity, and I is impact. So when you say, hey, Ravi, great presentation, it's harmless on the surface, but if we go deeper, it kind of sucks. And I'll tell you why, because it lacks those three elements. So let's go deeper. We could say, hey, Ravi, that was one of the most impactful keynotes I've heard all day at the conference. That story that you shared in the first few minutes about your 3-year-old struggling to brush her teeth and how you bribe her to do so and how you somehow pulled it back to and I'm making this up as I go, but pulled it back to leadership was incredible. You know what? You've really inspired me to bring in more of my truth and my personal stories into my presentations. Thank you for that. That's a different level of depth. That shows intention. Now, the key is you want to focus on quality over quantity. I was speaking to a one-on-one client of mine, a private client, and this individual was saying that there is somebody in their organization who weaponizes this, but it's so obvious because they just walk around giving compliments to the point where it feels awkward. It's like, wow, like 3 in 2 minutes, right? Or like, it's just too much. And also complimenting on things which feel odd in the context of a work setting. It's just not a good look. It's just,
I
and
don't
you're
even
both
wanna know.
laughing.
Mine's going so many places.
I'm not even going to tell you, right? But what I'm saying is, fellas, don't do it, is what I'm saying, okay? So let's now talk about how to receive a compliment with grace, because they're two sides of the same coin. Now, maybe you can resonate, but I'll never forget this. I was about 10-ish years old. Now, and I was with my dad, and he just watched me finish playing a cricket game. And I had a good game. I'd say it was good, but for some reason, to the outside world, it was incredible. So a dad from the opposite team came over to me and he said, "Young man, you're an incredible cricket player." Young man, are you listening? You are an incredible cricket player. I didn't look at him in the eye. I pretended he wasn't even there, and I just continued the conversation with my dad because I was like, oh my God, this feels so awkward. He's complimenting me in public. I was so embarrassed that I was unintentionally rejecting his gift. I was deflecting because clearly little Ravi in that moment didn't feel like his performance was enough. Now, let's take that to the leaders of today. Let's take that to salespeople, customer service professionals. When you receive a compliment from your leader, try not to deflect, because actually that compliment is a gift and you wouldn't reject somebody's gift, would you? So you want to own it. And one way I teach how to do that is just say, "Thank you so much. I really received that." Now, if I hit you with a compliment back almost instantly, it can sound insincere. If I deflect, I'm rejecting the compliment. And if I stay silent, it's like, what story does this tell Tiffany and Kelly about my self-worth? So I would say the key 3 ingredients to accepting a compliment with grace is truly allow your nervous system to feel it. So pause, allow yourself to really absorb that gift. Okay. And the second thing is don't deflect. Own it. Own it that you've just been acknowledged for your genius. And the third thing is keep it brief, your response. And in that moment, it may not make sense to provide a compliment back. And that doesn't make you not rude. If you just say, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate it." "Oh, but you're incredible too." You know, people do that. "Oh, no, but you're so great." And it's like, okay, was that real or not? Maybe you just say, "Thank you so much. I really received that." And in that moment, that is good enough.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. This has been a great conversation. I think Kelly said it at the beginning. This could be a 2 or 3-parter. There's so much good stuff in your book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
by the time we
Thank you.
post this, it will be out so people can purchase it. But outside of reading your book, can you do what all of our revenue insiders do on the podcast and leave us and anyone listening with a question to help us form a point of view, something we can take back as homework?
Thing the listener could take back as homework. Do I have the permission to give 60 seconds of context here before I give it?
Do
Yeah.
it.
Sure do.
Go for it.
So often one of the problems in life and leadership that I see from my lens and my perspective is that we are too busy telling people what to do versus showing them who to be. And I really lean on social learning theory. And to grossly oversimplify, it's the idea that human beings learn by observing and imitating others, specifically the consequences that receive a positive reward and avoiding the ones that don't. And Albert Bandura had it nailed, in my opinion. He really did. So what I would ask the audience to think about, what I would invite them to think about is, where in your life right now is there a lack of congruency between the spoken word and your behavior?
Deep.
5
Yeah.
things come to mind that I really need to spend some time thinking about. concerning.
Wow, that was quick. That was quick. But the idea really here is to be compassionate and acknowledge where we are currently out of integrity with ourselves and figure out how we can close the gap. Because that's where I believe we become more confident. That's where I believe our spoken word becomes more potent when we are in integrity.
So good. I'm going to need to think about that over a glass of wine, I think, is the only way to digest that information, but that's wonderful. Okay, Ravi, where can our listeners find your book? How can they connect with you? What's the best way?
So the book is available where all books are sold. So you can catch it on Barnes & Noble, Amazon. But if you prefer, head on down to theravirajani.com/book and you can buy your order, or rather buy your copy of Relationship Currency. And when it comes to getting in touch, whether it's for sales kickoffs or just asking me questions or just telling me, if what you've resonated with the most in this podcast episode, head on down to LinkedIn. It's probably I'd say it's the platform I'm the most active on when it comes to social media. And once again, the Ravi Rajani in terms of the handle.
Amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was so great having you on. I really enjoyed this.
So
Thank you. I
a lot.
appreciate you both. Thank you.